Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, members of the board, all of our guests. It is 9 o'clock on the 28th of October, and we will commence the regularly scheduled monthly meeting of the Police Services Board. We do have a piece of business to deal with before we move on to our guests from New York Regional Police, and that is an appeal to a false alarm bylaw. Excuse me. However, I do ask members of the board if there are any disclosures of pecuniary interest, and if there are, the general nature thereof. Seeing none, we do not have ceremonial activities this morning, but I do want to express clearly and with heartfelt feeling the loss of a past counselor, John Wells, who I met first and butted heads with in 1999 over the regional government issues. John and I became fast friends thereafter, and we served together for 8 years around this table. And to Betty, Dean, and the rest of the Wells family, my deepest and most sincere condolences on behalf of this board and personally as well, and I'll deal with that on a separate line. And I do appreciate Norfolk County Council in lowering the flag to half staff in his memory. John was a great guy, very great guy. So that then takes us to the false alarm bylaw appeal. Mr. Ron Pearson, Charlottesville Road 1, St. Williams. All members should have this in their package. It's the appeal application form. Attached to that is a bit of narrative from the Community Services Division that handles the administration for this bylaw, and that is on page 5 of that attached document. And in summary, on page 7, and we do have someone on the phone who will speak to us in a moment. In summary, the attending officer was dispatched as the business owner could not provide the correct verbal password to the alarm company, which was Fluent. That's the name of the company. The officer confirmed with the property owners that the alarm was a result of an accidental trip. Under bylaw 2020-1, a false alarm is defined as any signal from a security alarm system that is responded to by the police service resulting in a false dispatch and is caused by A, testing of an alarm without police knowledge and approval; 2, alarms caused by the negligence or carelessness of the alarm business, the alarm system owner, or the alarm user; 3, alarms activated due to mechanical failure or improper installation, and or alarms activated by internal or external atmospheric conditions, vibrations, or power surges. The property owner indicates that the alarm was owned by the business owner, and the alarm company indicates that the business owner did not know the verbal password to cancel the alarm, which was activated with a key fob. Based on submitted information, the carelessness of the alarm system owner is what activated the alarm. The alarm system owner is not the property owner in this case. So the question is up to the board, once we hear from the property owner, is this a false alarm? So, is Mr. Pearson on the line?
And Mr. Pearson, you will have to click *6 on your phone to unmute yourself.
Mr. Pearson, you'll have to unmute yourself. Okay, what we will do then, until Mr. Pearson and Owen Jaggard sort this out, is we'll move on in the agenda and get back to Mr. Pearson. So we'll just hold that in abeyance for the time being. And then we'll move on to the next item on the agenda, and that is Detective Sergeant Ahmed Saleh of the York Regional Police, and he has some guests with him. I'll let him introduce those guests as well. And he is here at our invitation, and we thank him very much for accepting that invitation to speak about what is occurring, has occurred in York Region, and with the partners that York Region has, and beyond that relationship. I understand there's a broader provincial issue at play here, and he has a presentation slide deck that is on your display. So if you don't have that powered up, we ask you to do that. And I say to you, Detective Sergeant, good morning. Can you turn your volume up somewhat, sir? You're coming in very faint. You'll have to either move a lot closer to the microphone or turn your volume up. It's a test. Yeah, you're still faint, but I think we can deal with it at this point, and our technician is working at this end to make sure we're all set as well. So you can proceed, sir. Thank you very much. Can we pause you there? Sorry. Okay, we're just going to iron out some technical difficulties at this end if we can. If you just hold on, please.
sounded to me like he was just reading off what you already had on the computer.
Okay, so Detective Sergeant, we've finally resolved the issue with the sound at this end. So if you don't mind, we'll start from the beginning once again. Over to you, sir, to introduce whoever you may have with you.
Okay, great. Can you guys hear me now?
Yes, loud and clear.
Yeah.
Okay, awesome. That's great. So my name's Detective Sergeant Ahmed Salia. I'm the unit commander for the York Regional Police Guns, Gang, and Drug Enforcement Unit. And thank you very much for having me here today. I'm here with Detective Staff Sergeant Scott Mahoney as well, and he can introduce himself very quickly.
Hello. Yeah, Scott Mahoney with the OPP. I'm the program manager for the province Provincial Joint Forces Cannabis Enforcement Team. And we have teams from London, Toronto through to Ottawa.
That's great. Thanks, Scott. And again, thanks for having us here today. What I'm going to do here is go over York Regional Police's cannabis enforcement strategy and share some of the results from last year's Project Green Sweep. I'm going to start with the overview very quickly. We're going to go over very quickly the legislation as it relates to the medical licenses. I won't bore you too much with that, but it's an important part of the narrative. And from my understanding down in Norfolk there, you guys are fairly well versed with the Health Canada legislation. So we're just going to touch on it. Part of our strategy obviously utilizes multiple partners, and we're going to touch on that. Proposed standard operating procedure that we're working to put in place here. Go over our enforcement model. We're going to touch on and we're going to spend not too much time, but I definitely would like to hit on the organized crime element with regards to legal licenses and how they've embedded themselves in the space, and York's strategy moving forward. And if at any time anyone has a question, please feel free to chime in, or I can take questions at the end, whichever the moderator prefers. So on the very first slide here, I just want to touch on the legislation here that's in place. So everything kind of came to head in 2016, where the legislation was changed to the Access to Cannabis for Medical Purpose Regulations, the ACMPR. It replaced the pre-existing act. So two significant things happened leading up to the change in legislation. In 2015, there was a Supreme Court, R versus Smith, where the Supreme Court determined that it was unconstitutional to prevent individuals from extracting concentrates from cannabis products. And that was kind of the slippery slope that took us to February 2016, R versus Lazard. And this is really what changed the legislation to what it is today. R versus Allard, essentially, the court found that the court found that requiring individuals to get their cannabis from licensed producers violated their liberty, Section 7 charter rights, essentially finding that it was unconstitutional. In a nutshell, it deemed that it was restrictive and it didn't provide reasonable access for persons to have access to cannabis. And immediately after that case, the previous legislation was struck, and 6 months later, the ACMPR was introduced. Now, I just want to be clear with regards to our position on the legislation. Our position is we're not for prohibition. So, and I just want that to be clear. This prohibition of cannabis never worked previously, and our model and our position is that the issue that needs to be addressed and resolved is the legal loopholes that's within the legislation that allows organized crime to kind of shelter themselves in the space and capitalize on the loopholes as it relates to the medicinal licenses. And we're gonna definitely explore that and touch on that later on, but I just wanted to make that distinction. Some of the partnerships that we've really been able to develop over the last couple of years as it relates to the cannabis space is obviously with our local municipalities. So we work very closely with our bylaw and building inspectors, our Ontario Fire Marshal's Office, the Electrical Safety Authority. And it's important in the sense that a lot of the times we're finding that these organizations or these bylaw inspectors are entering into buildings to conduct their own inspections, and they determine that these places are illegal cannabis sites. So having these relationships with them is really integral for us to be able to efficiently tackle these illegal sites. It's a lot more efficient for a building inspector or fire marshal to come to us and say, this specific site is operating illegally, and essentially we can take the information that they give us, seek judicial authorization, and do search warrants essentially within a day or two, as opposed to a 2 or 3 week long investigation. We have a relationship with them. We meet with them quite regularly. We have an officer that's specifically and exclusively dedicated as a cannabis intelligence officer, and he works and communicates with these municipalities, fields calls from them, answers questions for them, and essentially through that relationship, it helps inform a lot of the enforcement action that we've done over the last year. Health Canada also is one of our partners. I know there's, how do you say it? I guess there's difference of opinions on Health Canada's role in all of this, but the Health Canada agents and the officers that are working kind of side by side with us in the field, they're all of the same opinion. They're dealing with the same issues that we're dealing with, the same issues that you're dealing with. And in fact, they've given us some of the unique strategies that we've employed in some of our search warrants. And again, I'll touch on that in some of the slides in the future in the presentation here. So I consider them very close partners in this battle against the illicit cannabis market. And other law enforcement agencies, it goes without saying, we work incredibly close with the OPP and their cannabis enforcement team. We share information, we share data. We work with other municipal services to try and come up with unique and different strategies that are consistent across the province. And we're going to give you a couple of examples of that as the slideshow continues. So with our proposed standard operating procedure, essentially this is what's been happening over the last little while, and we want to make sure as a law enforcement agency that we maintain the integrity of our investigations. So and what I mean by that is this, is oftentimes one of the local municipalities, they would call us and they would say, we're going to do an inspection. We think this place is illegal. Why don't you guys come and piggyback with us and conduct a criminal investigation? So we've made it abundantly clear to our partner agencies as by law and the Fire Marshal's Office that we can't enter into a criminal investigation by piggybacking off their bylaw investigation. They have to be separate and distinct. Now, what we've proposed to them and what we've been doing over the last several months is, if in the event that they're entering into a site that they're going to be conducting an inspection at, they contact our field officer there, Martin Kissy. He attends the location with them. He doesn't enter into the site with them. He comes with uniform officers that kind of stand by on the outside, and they're essentially there to keep the peace. Once the inspection is completed and the bylaw officers or the building inspector exits and they say this place they believe is illegal for the following reasons, then we as an organization, Martin Kissy and the officers on the ground, they'll freeze the location. They'll contact me as the enforcement arm for York Regional Police and the drug unit, and we mobilize very swiftly. We draft judicial authorizations, and that allows us to enter into the place lawfully. There are exceptions to the rule, obviously, but for the most part, it is imperative that we keep the criminal investigation independent and distinct from any bylaw investigation. Otherwise, it becomes extremely problematic when it comes to court. So in 2020, I can tell you we investigated approximately 60 locations in York Region alone. We ended up executing 15 search warrants at those locations, which is part of our green sweep I'll touch on later. Really, our strategy, we're not reinventing the wheel here. It's We simply want to disrupt and dismantle as many illegal sites as possible. By disrupting the organized crime that's kind of embedded themselves in this region, and by dismantling as many operations and eradicating them as much as possible, the goal is to drive them out of the region. Again, we act very swiftly. As soon as we determine the place is operating illegally and we have reasonable grounds to believe that there's criminal activity, we mobilize and we dismantle the sites as quickly as possible. And then when we talk about some of the strategies we employ, and very similarly to the OPP and other services, this is one of the examples of us collaborating with OPP, Durham Police, and other agencies to talk about unique strategies. One of them being what is an outdoor grow versus an indoor grow, and what it means, and how do we deal with overgrows specifically at individual sites. And I'm going to touch on those two specific strategies in the next couple of slides, but that's really part of our model. Also, with regards to the most efficient way to execute these warrants, I touched on it earlier. It's having a very robust bylaw contingency that is out there and conducting inspections, building inspectors that are conducting inspections, fire marshals, electrical. If they're out there conducting inspections regularly and they're able to identify these locations without having us utilize resources to conduct 3-4 week investigations, it becomes extremely efficient for us to be able to eradicate the illegal cannabis sites. And part of the model that we're excited about is implementing a cost recovery strategy with all the municipalities. I think this will be a pretty good disruption piece and deterrent. So in the past, we currently have a MOU in place with the city of Markham. So between about, I would say, 2005 to 2015, we were experiencing clandestine chemical labs throughout the region, specifically in Markham. Being able to dismantle these operations effectively and properly and safely were not cheap. And so we were able to put together an MOU in place where York Region Police would contract chemical specialists and storage at storage facilities, equipment that we were utilizing in order to have our officers safely dismantle these operations. We were then billing the town or the city with the cost incurred by us, and they would in turn levy that cost onto the property for each of the properties. So what we want to do moving forward, and we've already started discussions with all the municipalities in York Region, is a couple of things. One, coming up with a consistent bylaw across the region for every single municipality. And next week, we're meeting with the region as a whole, and we're looking at putting together, we're starting to put together anyway, an MOU very similar to what we did with the clandestine chemical labs. We want to do something similar with the cannabis, the illegal cannabis sites.
Can I interrupt you there at this point?
Sure.
Just a question. When you talk about partnerships and outreach, have you been in touch with the Ontario Association of Police Services Boards?
We have not yet. And I should say specifically, members from Guns and Gangs have not. I don't know specifically if our executive command team have had those conversations with them, but that's something I can definitely follow up and give you a clear answer, probably within the week or so.
Okay, at the end of this meeting and sometime thereafter, we'll give you the handshake and you can take it from there.
Great, thank you. And we were just touching on the cost recovery. So one part of our model moving forward is, so essentially this, when we dismantle one of these sites, it takes probably, when we're doing these eradication projects, it takes 20 to 30 officers, multiple weeks to do so. They're out there from 6 a.m. to 8 p.m. in hot summer days. We have officers who've gotten injured this year while they're on the sites. So what we've proposed, and we have a lot of support for, is essentially we're going to be hiring landscaping companies to come out and eradicate these locations. Once we get the judicial authorization, we can probably do 3 times as many in half the time. And the cost incurred from these landscaping companies will then be billed to the city and the municipality, which would then be levied on the individual's property tax. So I think that's going to be a significant disruption piece, and it's something that we're looking forward to putting together for 2021. So this is one of the strategies that I think we've used with the OPP and with some of the other municipalities, is the distinction between an outdoor and indoor grow. And this was really something that we had discovered from Health Canada, and essentially this. So if a structure is a solid permanent structure, has a roof, solid frame, foundation, or a door, and is available year long, it is considered indoor. If the greenhouse is temporary seasonal greenhouse that is not a permanent structure, which can easily be removed, it's considered outdoor. So this was really a game changer for us, because if you look at the picture on the slide here, you can see this structure essentially is metal poles and a piece of plastic that's thrown over top of it. So the license holder at this specific location was allowed to grow only with an indoor license, not with an outdoor license. As far as we're concerned, and as far as Health Canada is concerned, this does not fit the criteria of what we consider to be indoor, what Health Canada considers to be indoor, and we dismantled it along with several others like it. So here's another example of what
Interrupt you there for a second.
Sure.
Just a question for you. It's the mayor. In terms of the indoor versus outdoor, though, and making that determination as to how their license is issued, the biggest challenge that we have are with guys that have the designated producer licenses. Not only will Health Canada not confirm whether or not they do have a designated grow license at a location, well, I mean, they won't even do that for us. So how would we get to the level of determining whether it was an indoor or outdoor license that was issued?
So we have a designated officer who works exclusively in this space. He's an intelligence officer that is designated to work. He's kind of an extension of CASO as well, the Criminal Intelligence Service of Ontario, and his sole purpose is to investigate and gather intelligence on cannabis. He has partnerships with Health Canada, and so he simply makes a phone call. As a law enforcement official, to be able to make that phone call is probably a little bit different from someone who's a civilian. So we have a designated officer who simply picks up a phone and says, is this specific site, 123 Main Street, is this licensed to have, does it have a cannabis license? And they would say yes or no, and then they would give us the details. Is this an indoor or is it an outdoor licensed facility? How many plants does it have? Who's the designated person on the license? So that really informs the crux, that is the crux of our investigation. So when you're looking at this picture here, or the next picture here, and Health Canada tells us these guys are only licensed for an indoor facility, not an outdoor facility, that in and itself, without any other information, makes that license, from our perspective, null and void, and they are now producing cannabis illegally, and we would go eradicate that specific site.
Yeah, no, it makes perfect sense to me. It's just a matter of we're not able to access that information. And even when Health Canada did their presentation, they even verified that OPP really wasn't allowed to access that information due to privacy laws in this country. So it's awesome that you guys have an intelligence officer. I guess I'm just wondering how we access an intelligence officer of our own with those connections to Health Canada.
I mean, I'll let Scott chime in here, but I mean, I'm fairly certain that they would have, whether it's an intelligence officer or an enforcement officer, I'm fairly confident they would have that access. Scott, can you chime in there, please?
Yes. Any police officer has access to a 1-800 number that is for law enforcement only, and we can use that number to call Health Canada. And as Ahmad stated, just provide either the address or a suspect's name, and Health Canada will provide us with their license information or the property license information, whether it's one license or up to 4 licenses, and what the details of that license are. I'm not aware of a number that the public can call. I'm surprised that bylaw is not able to get that information, but that's something I can look into and get back to you on.
Yeah, that would be great, because not only is our bylaw not able to access that information, Health Canada, actually, it wasn't Health Canada sort of indicated that that information was available, and then it was it Inspector Walker, I believe, from the Provincial Cannabis Enforcement Unit, that said that no, that as a result of privacy laws, Health Canada's statement there was incorrect, and that it is true that OPP can't access that information. I mean, that's the whole crux of all of this. If we were able to know, who had a license and who didn't, and like you said, I mean, the outdoor versus indoor, that would be a great thing to tackle, but it's just, we have no way of accessing that.
Okay, I will I'll definitely follow up with Health Canada to see if there is options, as well as some bylaw officers from other municipalities have been very proactive in their investigations, and I can speak to them and see if they have a number that they call, or how they get around finding out whether a place is licensed and what the license details are. And I'll get back to you.
That'd be great. Thanks very much.
We have a couple of other questions posed here. Councillor Columbus.
Yes, thank you, and thank you for being here, Ahmed. My question is with respect to disposal cost. You mentioned hiring a landscaper contractor to dispose of it. Why are we or anybody else harvesting this product and disposing of it? I do like the fact that when it is disposed, that you maybe can charge the landowner on the property taxes. But why not just spray it with a vegetable oil and destroy the crop and leave it right in place without having to harvest it? Like, what's so important about harvesting this stuff and then disposing of it?
I mean, that's a good question about having it destroyed right on scene. So one of the things that we were doing this year specifically, and it'll be in a slide that's coming up, we would actually bring machinery from the town. We would pull it from the ground, the plant, and we would shred it and throw it in the dumpster right on scene. The problem with leaving it right on scene, if we're alleging that they've committed a criminal act and that the criminal act is producing cannabis, there's an obligation on us to seize and or destroy the product. I think it may be problematic if we were just to leave it there, because the warrant specifically gives us the authority. It essentially says we shall seize, and in certain circumstances, like in this, when it comes to crops, we would have to destroy it. So for us to just leave it on scene, I don't think we would necessarily be allowed to do that. Having said that, it's an interesting question that's never crossed my mind, and I will explore that a little further, maybe through some Crown consultation.
Yes,
Hi,
I understand that vegetable oil.
Just another point on leaving the plants behind, or I guess dousing with a chemical. We'd have to obviously clear it through our crowns, but also the Ministry of Environment. And in past experience, typically we take the product to a landfill and bury it in sludge and garbage. We've had cases where local, criminal element have found out where we buried the cannabis and have broken into landfill and dug up the rotten cannabis. So imagine if we left it at the site, we could face some issues of people getting onto the site to try and to steal the leftover product.
Hi, this is Rachel Huggins. I'm with the OPP. I'm the executive lead for the cannabis file. By law, you actually can't leave the cannabis plants because Health Canada has a requirement for you to report on the seized and destroyed. So there is a process to it. And so law enforcement are actually on the hook, technically, for completing that process and reporting back to the federal government.
Okay, so has there been any movement forward with respect to having the cleanup go to the property owner?
So we've done it in the past when it comes to chemical clandestine labs. We have that MOU in place with the city of Markham, and we haven't tried that with the cannabis sites yet. However, we've already spoken to a number of the local municipalities here, and the majority of them, I'm going to say, are in agreement. I think we're waiting for confirmation from a couple of them. Having said that, we're meeting on November 6th, I believe, and I can definitely follow up with that meeting and even share some of the contacts from those local municipalities with you if you like to discuss the template that's going to be proposed.
That would be important because it's costing our municipality disposal costs. Thanks.
We have
No problem.
Member Van Houten.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you so much for your presentation. My comments just follow the mayor's comments as well, and just my interpretation from our presentation from Health Canada, there was a disconnect in relationship to getting the information back to the municipalities. I think there was some comments about whether it was medical or whatever, so the presentation you make would be very helpful if there's a better flow of information in regards to knowing if people have illegal or if it's an illegal operation in the area.
Hi, this is Rachel again. Just with regards, because I was on the presentation with Inspector Walker, what Health Canada has indicated, and from the development of the legislation, because it is health information, it is protected information. Law enforcement have access to a number and can get Health Canada to identify if an individual has a Health Canada registration, but it's actually only in the course of a criminal investigation, which means that it excludes anyone who isn't a police peace officer. And the legislation is written that way specifically because cannabis, in the case of the Health Canada medical regime, is medical information. So by law, will not be able to access that information because it's health information.
So to clarify,
Thanks.
it's a peace officer as defined in the criminal code?
Yes. And it's actually in the course of an investigation. So I can send you the specific section of the Cannabis Act that provides a law enforcement with that information. It's actually written into the regulations what and how law enforcement in the course of an investigation can access the information and what information they're able.
So let me see if I've got this right.
Yeah, thanks a lot for clarifying that, Rachel. I was going to say something very similar in the sense that I'd be very surprised. There's probably something that was lost in translation during your last meeting, where I can't see Health Canada having said that they wouldn't be able to share that information with the OPP. I can see them saying, like Rachel indicated, if it's a civilian who's asking for the information, I can see them absolutely saying no. But there's something was lost in translation, I suspect, with your last meeting there, where for whatever reason, we know they can access it, and so that's something that we can clarify for you for sure.
Okay, so it's, excuse me, the chair speaking. So just to be clear, so I understand, and I have a lot of experience with the federal government, having worked there for 35 years, the investigation, it must be a legal investigation that is ensuing, and it must be a peace officer that requests the information. Is that correct?
Correct. It's got to be a criminal investigation, and there is a phone number that law enforcement can contact Health Canada directly and obtain the license information.
And no warrant is required?
There is no warrant that is required to obtain this information.
I think the mayor has a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Okay, I'm confused though, because there must be a criminal investigation in order to obtain that information from Health Canada. However, the presentation began with the unique methods in which our bylaw could be useful to go in and determine, okay, is this an outdoor grow, an indoor grow, and overgrowth of plants. So you're using bylaw to initiate an investigation to the point where you're saying your uniform officers are just there to keep the peace. But in order to get the information we need, there has to be a criminal investigation ongoing. So I don't understand, like, you know, we have, let's say we have 80 addresses here in Norfolk County of suspected sites. We know there's only a handful of designated grow licenses even here. Are we able to provide you with a list of those 80 sites to have verified that they actually have a license attached to that property? And if they do have a license, the type of license that it is?
So I guess a couple of things to that question. So I guess I want to be clear with your initial point there, Ms. Mayor, in the sense that we never initiated an investigation through bylaw. We just don't. So, but bylaw can come to us and say, we just attended an address and we believe it's an illegal grow. It's never the reverse. It's never the police cannot go to bylaw and say, hey, we don't have enough grounds to execute a search warrant at this place. Hint, hint, nudge, nudge. Can you please go do a bylaw inspection there? We're not allowed to do that. But it works a lot more efficiently and it's lawful if bylaw is active in going out into the different sites, conducting their bylaw inspections, conducting their building inspections or electrical inspections or fire inspections. If they're out there doing it regularly and they happen to come across something, then they contact us, then we become engaged. And oftentimes, and they don't do it every time, but oftentimes before they enter into a facility, whether they believe it's illegal or not, it's irrelevant. They call us and they say, hey, can you please keep the peace? Can you please come and stand by at this location while we enter? We know this because oftentimes, and we'll show you in some of the slides moving forward, some of these places can be dangerous. They can be either fortified or they can have weapons. They can have weapons with some of the keepers from the inside. So there are some instances where bylaw or building inspectors just feel more comfortable attending these facilities with police presence. And so that's a very important distinguishing factor in all of this. With regards to your second point, with regards to how bylaw can inform themselves as to which site is legal and illegal, I don't necessarily have the answer to that. I don't know if Rachel or Scott, if you can chime in there.
Well, what I would say is that most of the times, the requirements for having an authorization means that you have to have it available and displayed. So if by law goes and attends a facility or a site, then they have the ability to ask to see that documentation.
Okay, we have also a question from Staff Sergeant Fashing here of the OPP.
Yeah, through you, Mr. Chair, I'm just curious on what auspices bylaw enforcement are initiating their inspections on these facilities.
I don't think they need any. My understanding with the bylaw inspections is so long as they're going in to conduct an inspection through their bylaw, it's different. There's a distinction between police and bylaw search authority. So they've got a little bit more of a robust search authority. Whereas with us, we need reasonable grounds to believe a criminal offense has been committed before we can go in and conduct the search. When it comes to bylaw, and I can't tell you exactly what it is specifically, but they've got the ability to go into these facilities strictly on being able to conduct a bylaw inspection. They don't need the reasonable grounds to believe a criminal offense has been committed. They operate with a little bit more, it's easier for them to enter these properties without a warrant.
Okay, so just to be clear, bylaw operates under the guise or the authority of council that has passed a bylaw. A bylaw, well, just back up a bit. A fire inspector can go in, absolutely. A building inspector can go in, absolutely. but bylaw must be acting on the basis of a bylaw passed by council. And so are you suggesting or saying, and I know this happened within the last week by a few other rural municipalities, they've passed bylaws related to odor and light pollution?
Yes. So one of the things where we're going to be discussing with on our meeting on November 6th is just that, is what bylaw can we implement consistently across York Region, where whatever that bylaw as it relates to illegal cannabis operations or even legal cannabis operations, what are those bylaws in Markham? Are they consistent with Vaughan? Are they consistent with East Gwillimbury? And how will that work to allow bylaw officers to conduct an inspection? So that's part of our model, really, is to ensure that all the bylaws in all the municipalities under the York umbrella are consistent and allow the same authority for bylaw to be able to enter and search.
Yeah, and also, if I may add, other issues come into play in terms under the Planning Act where there are setbacks defined by local jurisdiction, the separation of agriculture, and this is not agriculture, but the separation distancing between a residence and a grow operation of some sort is another one that would allow bylaw to step in. Certainly clean yard bylaw would be another one that the bylaw could enter into. But to go more strategic, and why I asked the question earlier about the Ontario Association of Police Services Boards, and we will give you that handshake, and I'll introduce you to Fred online, is the activity that you're undertaking to produce some sort of a consistent bylaw across Ontario is a great thing. Absolutely, and we would love to see it at the local level through the PSBs and certainly more importantly by council. And hence the mayor and the councillor are here today as members of the PSB. But if we take it from the bottom up, local bylaw discovers something during one of their inspections. They pass it along to, through their bylaw supervisor to the OPP. Then the local OPP, they're under contract to the municipality here, would take it to Guns and Gangs, their intelligence unit. Where would it flow? How would it flow up the line?
Scott, you're probably better suited to answer that with OPP than it is with us, because it would work a little differently with us. It would come directly to me, but with the OPP, I'll let Scott answer that.
Sorry, just cut out there. What was the question there, Ahmad?
So there was a question posed. So if bylaw was to conduct an inspection and they were to identify some sort of criminality, how would that flow of information make its way to the OPP where it becomes enforceable? In York, that information goes from bylaw specifically to one of our intelligence officers, and then that intelligence officer calls me directly, and then we mobilize and we conduct enforcement. I guess the same question the council, the chair was asking is how would that look with the OPP?
So the very similar. We haven't been asked to go to very many inspections, but the ones we have, we've sent a member from our cannabis team to go, much like you send your intelligence officer. A member from our cannabis team attends with a uniform officer, and much like yourselves, we stay outside the site. And then once bylaw inspectors come back out and advise that they're overgrowing and there's a criminal element there, then we freeze the premise and get a search warrant. In cases where we haven't been with bylaw and they come across a criminal infraction, then they would contact the local street team unit, and then the message would get to us and we would assign somebody to investigate that cannabis production site.
Okay, thank you for that clarification, and it's the street team. I see Staff Sergeant Fashing nodding up and down. The street team is our connection to that huge corporate entity called the OPP headquarters, is that right?
Well, yes, each OPP jurisdiction does have street team members, and they're I guess they're more accessible than our provincial team, but we're always there to assist them.
Thank you very much. We'll continue.
Okay, so let me show you the next slide here. And I want to make this distinction. So what you're looking at here is what we consider a legal indoor grow. There's a clear difference between what you're seeing here and what you're seeing here. It has a foundation, it has walls, the roof is made out of glass, it's got proper ventilation. Even though from a distance, from a bird's eye view, they may look similar, they're completely different. This, to us, fits the criteria and meets the Health Canada criteria of what an indoor grow would look like. When it comes to overgrows, this is a model that we've employed as well as the OPP, where traditionally with law enforcement, we would only seize the overgrow amount. So for instance, if a place was licensed to have 1,200 plants and they had 2,000 plants, the 800 plants would get dismantled and destroyed, and the balance of the 1,200 would remain on site. What we've done, and I know the OPP is doing this as well, we're very aggressive with this approach. Whereas if we have grounds to believe that the operation is being used to produce and traffic cannabis illegally, we're dismantling the entire operation. And we look for evidence, kind of like what you see in this picture here. This specific site had 790 plants or 790 pounds drying. There's other indicia of trafficking that we look for, such as packaging, cash, firearms. And once we determine or have grounds to believe that the entire facility is being used to traffic and to produce illegally, everything gets dismantled and destroyed. Just an example of some evidence that we might find that would help strengthen our belief that the facility is being used as a commercial enterprise. Here you have large amounts of chemicals that are being used to extract from the cannabis. This one of the things that we would look for to help strengthen our grounds and our belief that the place is being used for commercial trafficking. And keeping in mind this location here, and I think it's important to note, as well as the locations that you're seeing here and here, these are all licensed for personal medical purposes. They're not licensed to grow on behalf of the government and to provide cannabis and support the OCS, for instance, or other legal dispensaries. These locations, with the hundreds, if not thousands, of plants, are licensed to grow for purposes of only for medicinal purposes. So, again, that's part of the legislation that we are emphatically trying to have changed. But there's no reason why someone would have 790 pounds of drying cannabis that they would use for personal possession. In fact, it's funny that these locations, we're finding all the indicia we need to show that they're trafficking, but no indicia of personal use. So you're not finding grinders, you're not finding rolling paper, you're not finding pipes. You're just finding evidence of mass distribution. Here's just a couple of examples of the search warrants that were executed, just to highlight a few of them. The first one specifically, 18515 McCowan Road. You can see there they were licensed to have 876 plants with 2 different license holders, but ultimately we found over 5,000 plants. We found 2 handguns. We made 1 arrest and laid a couple of charges. This was an instance where the individual was trying to transfer his license, so he was licensed to be at a specific location, but failed to transfer it to another location, and we dismantled the entire operation. A couple of other good examples just for you guys to kind of glance at as I'm speaking. 4910 18th Side Road in King, that was an interesting one. We found there a number of exotic animals, including 2 zebras and 3 kangaroos. Our Vaughan bylaw became involved, and they're currently in the process of seeking enforcement with regards to the animals that were stored there. Another example here where specifically on King Road, the same one, 4910, they were authorized to have 1,757 plants. And as you see, we seized 1553, so it was under their authorized limit. But this was an example of an indoor versus outdoor. They were licensed to be indoor, not outdoor, but their structure was set up in such a manner that we believed did not fit the criteria as set out by Health Canada, and we dismantled the entire operation. Here are two other examples of that, where both of these locations were deemed to be, we believe them to be outdoor versus indoor. You can see they were authorized to have 1,700 plants. The first location on 5223 19th Avenue actually only had 560 plants, but they had harvested 500 pounds of cannabis ready. And both of these locations were actually dismantled in early October, so right in the harvesting season, you can see. So authorized to have 752, we only found 560 because they had just harvested a number of plants. But again, this was one of those indoor versus outdoor grows, and we dismantled the entire operation, even though they were under limit. And the fact that they had 500 pounds of harvested cannabis, plus some other indicia that we had identified, strengthened our belief that the operation was commercial in nature and for the illicit criminal market. A very similar set of circumstances in the Georgina address to your right. So overall, and this was a project that probably spanned 3 months. We executed 15 search warrants. We made 33 arrests, 67 charges. We seized a number of guns, crossbows, a taser, ammunition. We seized approximately 29,000 plants and 1,290 pounds of dried cannabis. Now, there was an additional seizure of 2,700 pounds of dried cannabis that is relating to green sweep, but not specifically to the eradication. Just an example of some of the reasons why bylaw likes to have us there. These places can be fortified, they can be armed, they can possess weapons. Some of these individuals who are involved in these operations are fearful of, they're not necessarily the people who are running or orchestrating the facility, but they're simply there as workers. And in some instances, they like to arm themselves as they fear for retribution or a possibility of a drug rip. For instance, this location here where there was 790 pounds of dried cannabis, this is one of the locations where one would suspect would be targeted by other street gangs or organized crime groups for a drug rip. This is an example again of one of our sites. Again, keeping in mind that it's comical to think that all of this cannabis that you see being destroyed and seized is all for quote unquote personal medicinal purposes. Again, there's no air of reality to that whatsoever. You can look in the background, you can see the heavy machinery provided by the town, wood chipper and a garbage truck. This really made a huge difference for us in this eradication sweep this year, because traditionally we would have to bring our own cube van. We would have to load the cube van with every one of those plants that you see, and we would do multiple runs back and forth to the destruction site. In this instance, and in this year's eradication, the municipalities were very cooperative in providing this machinery that you see, which was really efficient in the dismantling of these facilities. If you can only imagine now, our next year's plan is to use landscapers to be able to come and completely eradicate as many of these facilities as possible. It would be, like I said earlier, probably 3 times as fast and half the time. Here's an example of an indoor facility. I just wanted to point out a couple of things here. We talked about organized crime. We've said it a number of times, but I just want you to look at the degree and sophistication of this location. This just isn't something that was slapped together. This is a very well-funded, sophisticated, complex facility. Look at the lighting, look at the electrical, look at the venting. This place was deemed to be illegal by us. It was completely dismantled. And I just really want you to look at the scope and complexity of one of these facilities. This is not something that can be slapped together by someone who's suffering from, whatever the medical license may or may not have, not that they are not able to do it. The point here being is we're strongly of the opinion and belief that this is all well-funded and supported by organized crime. And really comes back to the loopholes in the legal license. Make no mistake that the organized crime networks that are fueling this, they're thriving in this current space. The proceeds that they're generating from these illicit cannabis sites, the proceeds that they're generating from trafficking in the criminal market, from exporting the cannabis into the United States, is being used to fund other aspects, other facets of their criminal enterprise. We're seeing a lot of correlations between methamphetamine producers and traffickers. We're seeing cannabis being transported into the United States in exchange for cocaine and for firearms. This is something that's previously been said anecdotally, but I can tell you definitively that we're currently involved in 2 independent, separate investigations of one individual traveling across, intercepted at the border with 1,000 pounds, a second individual with, I believe it was 1,700 pounds of cannabis that's being taken into the United States. This is a very complex issue. And I guess the frustrating part for law enforcement and obviously for you in the community is oftentimes people will hear, well, it's only weed, well, it's only cannabis, it's legal. And our position is, like I said very earlier, our position is not for prohibition. That's not the issue here. The issue here is the organized crime that's embedded themselves in this space, and they're generating large sums of money and cash to operate and fund other aspects of their criminal enterprise. And obviously, the issue that you're seeing in your community, you might not see the organized crime element as we see it. You have the other issue of having to live alongside these facilities, having to deal with the odor, having to deal with the light, having to deal with the uncertainty of living next to some of these facilities and some of the danger and some of the violence that they can spur. So that's part of the messaging that we're trying to be very clear about, especially when we go to the media or when we speak to our community, is that there has to be a clear distinction here between personal possession, prohibition, and the other aspect of this, which is everything that I just touched on.
We have a question from Board Member Santos.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Detective Sergeant and to the Detective Inspector, but I believe he's not there, and we have, I believe it's Rochelle. So the question goes out to both. So we heard 2.5 weeks ago that Health Canada has 70 inspectors, and you earlier in your presentation gave the indication that you're working with these inspectors. Has that happened in the last month or two, or is this just come to light?
Just in regarding to Health Canada inspectors, last year they increased their inspection team to 12 members, and that's for the country. Last year they did 5 inspections in Ontario, and since, in 2020 they haven't done any inspections in Ontario. I guess with COVID, they're not out inspecting these sites. Our connections that we've made with Health Canada is in regards to licensing. What we've done starting in the end of August, with every warrant we execute at a Canada's production site, we have a form that details all the information regarding the license holders' information, how many plants they were licensed for, how many plants we've actually seized, and a bunch of other information on that form. I send that directly to a contact at Health Canada, and they author a letter, send it to the 4 license holders, and advise them that their license will be revoked in 30 days if they don't respond. So that's something we've just undertaken that's something we've just undertaken in August. So we're just waiting for the results of that to start coming in. But our goal is to have obviously more consequences for these people who are violating their licenses on top of the product and equipment that we seize, but actually have their licenses revoked.
If I may, Mr. Chair, so Detective Sergeant, the reason I asked this question is because our neck of the woods here in Norfolk County, we haven't seen one inspector, number one. And what I continue to hear over and over is Health Canada, this all has to do with policy. So I understand we're in a major crisis, and I would say that we're at war. And the reason being is Health Canada isn't really doing anything about this policy and leaving it up to the municipalities. And we're speaking to yourself, and you represent the York region. I'm just wondering what else is happening out throughout Ontario and out throughout Canada, for that matter. So the question I have basically is this. If we're just scratching the surface, and you're giving us a clear understanding of what you're doing there at York Region, here in Norfolk County for the last month, I would say, the last month we've had, I believe, 5 million in illegal operations. And I believe it was September the 24th, October the 7th, and again, just earlier this week, October the 22nd. And we're just scratching the surface. So my question to you is, from a police board perspective, do we contact or do we continue to put pressure on Health Canada, or do we basically ask the Solicitor General of Ontario, from our perspective, what needs to be done?
Okay, just in regards to Canada, we've identified over 250 cannabis production sites in Canada and 172 sites in Ontario. And I'm sure that that's probably the tip of the iceberg. Our strategy is to tackle the ones we know about. We did Project Woolwich, which really shone a pretty good light on the illicit cannabis production market. So from an enforcement standpoint, that's the approach we're taking. And perhaps, Rachel, you could speak to some of the work we're doing with the chiefs of police and as well as with the governments.
Yes, sure. So I think that it's really important that everybody be on the same page with regards to large-scale cannabis grows, whether they're illegal or part of the Health Canada regime. So what I would say is that the OACP has taken a very strong stance on the illegal cannabis market in Ontario. So I am one of the co-chairs of the OACP Substance Advisory Committee, and we are working on providing some documentation to the federal government on what is transpiring in Ontario with regards to these large-scale operations that fall under the guise of the Health Canada authorization. I would say that from a federal perspective and the Association of Chiefs across Canada, there will also be a report going to the federal government outlining some of these operations and the consequences to public safety in the community. So as much as it isn't moving very quickly, I will say that the law enforcement community is definitely working together, both from an Ontario perspective and a national perspective, to outline very clearly to Health Canada with the associated data on what the impact these medical cannabis grows are having on communities and public safety. So as much as you may think that each police service is kind of working on their own and doing their own thing, behind the scenes, they're very much working together through these various committees. The OACP Organized Crime Committee is also involved So we are not just looking at the impact on, from an enforcement perspective, we're also looking at the bigger implications from an organized crime perspective. So for those of you who were on the call when Inspector Walker and I participated a few weeks ago, I actually am from the federal government and worked on the cannabis legislation. So I have a very good knowledge of the police boards and worked with them over the years on a number of files. I think that the police boards have an opportunity to collectively work together to put forward information that they're seeing from their various communities to Health Canada in a concise way on the impact that these operations are having on their communities. In 2021, Health Canada has to begin the review of the legislation. So it's mandated within the legislation that the Cannabis Act legislation be reviewed for any changes or issues. And Health Canada has 18 months to deliver that review. That's why the OACP and the CACP are working on these reports to provide to Health Canada to give them direction on different elements within the legislation. And I am very confident that the medical cannabis regime will come up. When we were developing the legislation, it was an issue that was repeated over and over again by law enforcement as a gap, and it continues to be a gap. What I can say is that if you look at some of the media releases, what York and other police services are doing is that they're reporting in a way that's very strategic, lots of data collection and evidence so that we can actually show the impact that it's having on the communities. And I think that OPP and other police services will be very happy and supportive to help boards that require guidance or information on how to, come together and put something forward to Health Canada and the federal government.
Thank you very much for that. It's Chair Trevally speaking again. To my earlier question about the relationship with the Ontario Association of Police Services Boards, and as I said, we'll give you that handshake following the meeting. What is the relationship with the municipalities associations such as ROMA, the Rural Ontario Municipalities Association, and AMO?
So we have been working with AMO, and in fact, I have a call with them scheduled tomorrow to talk about something that was mentioned on this during this presentation, looking at what can be done from or by AMO to support bylaws across the province. So similar things that can be done. So the OPP has developed more of a strategic approach to dealing with these grow operations, the large scale ones, and those that have implications to the Health Canada regime. And so we have engaged AMO and we provided them with our strategy and some of the information, and we're going to be following up with a phone call tomorrow to start figuring out what we can do that results in tangible information and tangible approaches that can go for across the province.
Thank you. We can continue now, please.
Okay, great. Thank you. When we talk about organized crime, you've heard it throughout the presentation from myself, from Scott, and through Rachel. Here's really something to help highlight what we mean by that and the amount of profits that are being generated by these groups. And again, keeping in mind, all of this is supposed to be for quote unquote personal possession. So for instance, just specifically from our project over the last few months, 1,290 pounds of dried cannabis translates to approximately $5.8 million on the street. In bulk, it's worth about 1.2 million, almost 1.3 million. And again, if this was strictly for personal possession, 1,290 pounds of dried cannabis translates to almost 1.7 million cannabis, or over 1.7 million cannabis joints. The same with the amount of plants that we seized. Almost 29,000 plants. The street value in that translates to to over $131 million. The bulk value of that translates to almost 29 million. So again, you can see why this is such a desirable place for organized crime networks to embed themselves, because the profit margins are extraordinary. This is a quote. I'm going to read this to you. This was generated by one of our analysts who's working actually with the OPP, and the analyst made this assessment. Intelligence holdings collected in years revealed further links that demonstrate one large network involved in interconnected cannabis grow operations. Links to organized crime subjects operating within a known network can be seen amongst a number of grows, although it cannot be said that they are under the same ownership or management. Links extend beyond York Region, including license holders are also operating cannabis grows in Durham, Haldimand County, and Waterford. Essentially, his assessment on the individuals that were identified during Project Green Sweep is that these organized crime networks extend well beyond York Region. They extend across Ontario, and this is only from analyzing data from the 15 search warrants that were executed by York Region. Again, just an example, when we say, and Scott and Rachel have both said this as well, is this isn't just about dismantling these operations. This is about identifying the organized crime networks, coming at this strategically, knowing who the players are in this space, and being able to conduct enforcement action, gather intelligence on them, in other facets, not exclusively through cannabis. And you can see this is an actual flow chart. I blacked out, obviously, of names and faces and locations, but you can see the work that's happening behind the scenes as our analyst was able to connect the dots and put together these organized crime groups. And this is all data that's been shared with some of our partner agencies. As Rachel indicated earlier, we're all working together behind the scenes here to try and come up with unique and effective strategies to dismantle these networks. And really, just to end the slideshow here, our strategy moving forward, it's a lot of the things we talked about, the ongoing partnerships with the municipalities, working together with other municipalities and other police services, obviously, the seasonal enforcement strategies. And I think this was an important thing that I had to specifically share with our local mayors and councillors, is that we just don't have the capacity to do this every day, year in, year out. This is something that's likely going to happen. Our eradication is likely going to happen once, maybe twice a year, kind of similarly like it did this year at the spring going into the fall. You have to understand from a police and law enforcement perspective, this is very important, but we're also dealing with an opiate crisis. We're dealing with gun trafficking, with cocaine trafficking, with methamphetamine production and trafficking. So obviously the cannabis issue is on the top of our priority list, but we have to balance it with everything else that we're trying to investigate. And I'm certain the same can be said with the OPP, who are dealing with this on a provincial level, as opposed to us dealing with it specifically within one municipality. The OPP is dealing with an entire province. So seasonal strategies is kind of how we're taking it. Now, having said that, if we come across an illegal cannabis operation, we're obviously going to eradicate it immediately. We're not going to wait for the eradication season. But our plan moving forward is to do what we did this year, have at least 1 or 2 cycles where we conduct heavy enforcement. Continuing to develop intelligence on the crime groups. That was in the last slide. You saw how effective that that could potentially be. For asset forfeiture is a huge part of any type of criminal investigation, especially when you're dealing with the organized crime element. Being able to seize or freeze assets that's derived from criminal activity is always a very effective way of disrupting these groups. The cost recovery strategies is something we talked about previously, and our ultimate goal, which we touched on very briefly here at the end, stemming from one of the questions from one of the individuals from the panel. Our ultimate goal, and not just York Regional Police, OPP, but law enforcement as a whole, is to see a change in legislation. I'm very cautiously optimistic that at some point in the coming years there will be a change of legislation. And I don't want to oversimplify the problem, but I truly believe it's as simple as changing, if there's a legislation change that prohibits someone from growing 300-400 plants and being able to possess 100 plus pounds of cannabis for purposes of medicinal licensing, I think this problem goes away fairly quickly, or it starts to make a very significant dent in the problem. That simple change in the legislation, and there's going to be other changes that have to happen in the legislation, make no mistake. But I think we need to aggressively work collectively with our in the law enforcement industry and with our community to try and get change specifically as it relates to being able to possess and grow hundreds of cannabis plants and house 4 licenses in one location. I think that starts to make a difference fairly quickly.
Thank you.
And subject to any questions and anything that Rachel or Scott, you guys would like to add.
Thank you very much. There will be questions. First, we'll go to the mayor.
I actually have to leave, Mr. Chair, but I just really wanted to thank you guys for your presentation today. That was excellent, actually. So thank you for your time. It was really appreciated.
Thank you, Member Columbus.
Yes, Ahmed, thank you for a great presentation. Approximately a year ago, I was standing in line at Tim Hortons, and a gentleman that was standing behind me, I says, how's your crop coming along? And he said, he looked at me kind of puzzled, and I said, well, you've got marijuana growing in your greenhouse, don't you? I says, you've got 52 plants in total. He said, well, how do you know that? I said, well, I Googled it on Google Earth, and you can see right through the plastic exactly how many plants you got. So my question is, how about surveillance with on plant numbers with these grow ops? Is it legal to use a drone to put up in the air to check the plant population out as per the license?
It's a very good question, and without giving too many of our investigative techniques, I can tell you're probably part of our strategy in surveillance. Obviously, surveillance doesn't only occur from the ground up; it can occur from other angles as well. But again, without giving too many of our investigative techniques, you're pretty bang on with that assessment.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. A couple of questions. Oh, sorry, Member Van Houten.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. But just very, very quickly, I thought it was an absolutely impressive presentation. I thank you so much for it. It was very enlightening. And also, yeah, I guess it's disappointing, and I guess that's part of how sometimes things work. But, you can see some loopholes. You can see glaring loopholes, and yet it takes a long time to have some of that thing corrected. But thank you again so much. I thought it was an excellent, excellent presentation.
Thank you. And first, I do appreciate, and the board appreciates, the clarifications that have come out today in terms of the relationships with Health Canada, relationships with bylaw and our police services, particularly the OPP, which is under contract to us. And we do greatly appreciate that huge organizational entity that sits behind our locally contracted police service called the OPP. A couple of questions, however, if you will indulge me. There was a Globe and Mail article most recently, Ahmed, where you were quoted, and it talked about organized crime and focused, or at least the article started out with the illegal gambling operation down in Markham, and someone brought to my attention that the most recent activity here in terms of enforcement, one of the arrested persons was from Markham, and they were trying to draw some sort of a line between the two operations. A comment on that?
Yeah, I mean, to be candid, in Markham, we have a number of the organized crime figures who are kind of spearheading some of these illegal operations, not just here in York Region, but throughout the entire province, and probably in some instances across the country. This is a very complex, sophisticated networks that extend well beyond York Region, and we're very mindful and cognizant of that. And we know from our investigations that includes also Norfolk and other places across the country, or sorry, across the province. And all I can say to that, Mr. Chair, is we are mindful of it, and it's one of the reasons why we make an effort to meet and have dialogue and ongoing dialogue with not just our community, but in this instant, Norfolk and others across the province, because we know some of the organized crime figures that are behind this happen to live here in our region, specifically in Markham.
Okay, thank you very much for that. Second question, when you look at some of the statistics, you notice that the number of plants allowed, 1,769 or whatever that number is, seems to be somewhat consistent. So you say, well, is that the ultimate prescription level or dosage level that the doctors are prescribing? And if so, on the illegal operations or the overgrows, what ramifications are there to these doctors?
I mean, two very good questions. So one very common number that we're seeing through Health Canada, and Scott, you can correct me if I'm wrong here, I think it's 460 or 462, something along those lines, or 435, but we're seeing that quite often. Is that what you guys are seeing, Scott?
Yes.
Yeah, very consistent numbers. Health Canada has a formula, so if a doctor prescribes a certain number of grams of cannabis to a patient per day, Health Canada takes that number and bases it on, I believe it's 75 grams per plant indoor and 192 grams per plant outdoor. So they do their calculations and come up with a number of plants each person's allowed to grow.
And the second part of that question, Mr. Chair, is there hasn't been an instance that I've been involved in, and I can't speak for the OPP, where we've been able to identify a doctor who provided a prescription kind of illegally and on the guise of working in concert with the organized crime groups. We haven't seen it. If we were ever to identify anything along those lines, then yes, we would obviously investigate and lay the appropriate charges. But it's one of those unfortunate circumstances where, like Scott described, they're following a formula. And that formula, again, comes from Health Canada. And they're simply prescribing the allotted medication as they're allowed to by that formula that Scott described.
Can I just add that as part of the OPP strategy, we are looking at basically the websites that kind of, advertise that you can come to them to get your prescription or through them, and they will help you fill out the paperwork. We do know that Health Canada themselves are looking at prescribing practices. Now, we all know that it will likely take some time, but they are looking at prescribing issues with the College of Physicians. And so we at the OPP thought at the same time we would look at some of those websites to gather the intelligence and the information behind them and see if there are links between them and to doctors as well.
Thank you very much for that. And just going down my list here, to Ahmed, thank you very much for the slide deck that you did send to us, and the board and member of the media who is here have been looking at that. My question is relative to a further reference to the Ontario Association of Police Services Boards. Are there speaking notes that are attached to your slides?
I don't think there are. I don't think so, Mr. Chair.
Okay, no, that's fine. I just thought if they were, it would be very convenient to pass those along as well. And we do have your permission to share this deck with the OAPSB?
You do, correct.
Thank you. Certainly, I can tell you now with the member of the media here, it's out in the public already, so. Having said all of that, let me just do a quick, real summary. There was some confusion, perhaps some misunderstanding on our part from the presentation that took place October the 7th with the special meeting of the PSB here and the Health Canada, and I'm glad we've clarified that to a certain extent. It is something that the local council, and I'm looking at and speaking to Councillor Columbus here, has to take under advisement in terms of their bylaw enforcement, and not just the one officer they have that deals with marijuana, but the others that deal with setbacks and the clean yard bylaw, those types of things. And most recently, as I said, a few municipalities have passed bylaws related to odor and light pollution, and I've sent those forward to the clerk here in Norfolk County, so he has those. But the council, if they see this as a very important issue, as much as we see it here around this table, action has to be taken. I'm glad to see that the relationship between bylaw and the OPP and the police service, wherever they may be in Ontario, is there and it's working well. And certainly we will have a short discussion about that later on in a closed session. The involvement of AMO and the OAPSB is important if we were to look at some sort of standardization of bylaws across Ontario, and I think that's a good thing, notwithstanding the special circumstance that may exist or occur at the municipal level. Certainly a framework, a toolkit that can be passed along is very important for the local municipalities, particularly the small municipalities, and we have many of them that are less than 10,000 in Ontario, and whether they're under a county system or a regional system really doesn't matter. It's at the local level where the problem exists, and historically the first inkling you get of a problem is people complain about smell, and then it goes from there. So let me just say, on behalf of the board, thank you very much. I'll ask if you have anything further you want to add at this point.
I'm good. Ahmed Salih is very good, and thank you very much for having us attend today. Thank you for the OPP counterparts with Scott and Rachel. I really appreciate you guys as well sitting through this, and thank you to the board for the invite.
Oh, the thanks is ours, and to Rachel and Scott and yourself, sir, have a great day, and again, thank you very much for your presentation. I'm sure we'll be in touch.
Thank you.
Great, thank you. Have a great day.
Thank you. Goodbye.
So to the board then, I need a mover and a seconder to accept the presentation, deputation of Detective Sergeant Ahmed Salih. So we have Councillor Van Houten and Member Van Houten and Member Santos. All in favor? Thank you very much. Then if we can go back to the agenda, let's hope that we have the technical issues sorted out on the appeal to the bylaw on false alarms by Mr. Ron Pearson. So, Mr. Pearson, are you there, sir?
Yes, he's here.
Yes, we're here.
My husband has hard of hearing, so I'll be with him.
Okay, so if you would just stand by for a moment, I'm glad that we have the connection. And I just want to go over some of the issues that we have in front of us for the board to reflect on. Um, Then we will ask you for your input and explanation or reasons for the appeal. So what we have in summary, again, board, is on page 7 of the attachment that was sent out to you, is the attending officer was dispatched as the business owner could not provide the correct verbal password to the alarm company, and the alarm company is Fluent, that's the name of it. The officer confirmed with the property owners that the alarm was a result of an accidental trip. Under the bylaw 2020-01, a false alarm is defined as any signal from a security alarm system that is reported to the police service resulting in a false dispatch that is caused by one of the following: the testing of an alarm without the police knowledge and approval, alarms caused by the negligence or carelessness of the alarm business, the alarm system owner, or the alarm user. 3, alarms activated due to mechanical failure or improper installation, and or number 4, alarms activated by internal or external atmospheric conditions, vibrations, or power surges. The property owner indicates that the alarm was owned by the business owner, and the alarm company indicates that the business owner did not know the verbal password to cancel the alarm, which was activated by a key fob. Based on submitted information, the carelessness of the alarm system owner is what activated the alarm. The alarm system owner is not the property owner in this case, which is Mr. Pearson. So, board, we're going to hear from Mr. and Mrs. Pearson. I assume that's who's on the line here. And then we will take it under advisement. So I say to you, Mr. Pearson, over to you.
Everything you say sounds legit, but the alarm, we realize, has a problem. It went off earlier before the police came, and we caught that because when we're in the house, if everything's quiet and it happened to go off, we heard it because it's not part of the house. It's fastened to the barn in the store. So for some reason, nobody called the people that actually owned the system. The second time it went off, the police showed up like at 11 o'clock at night. And when they called me, they were already in the parking lot. So, it was nothing we could do about it. But I just feel that the other people that owned the system should have been notified first, and then they could have turned it off from their phone. We have to manually turn it off if it goes off, and we can catch it. So anyway, I unplugged the system, and then a day later, maybe 2 days, the alarm company called me and said they couldn't monitor the system. The battery is dead. I said, well, that's because it's turned off. You have a problem with your system. And they said, okay, we'll check it out. Well, they've never got back to me on it. And so I've left it unplugged because I don't trust it. And that's basically the whole thing in a nutshell. But, whatever has to be done has to be done, I guess.
All right, thank you very much, and we'll have some questions from the board members. First is Mr. Columbus.
Yes, Mr. Pearson, how far do you live from the building that was alarmed?
Well, the house is fastened to the barn, and the store is fastened to the barn, but the house isn't fastened to the store. So we don't hear it if it goes off unless we happen to be in the store, or if we're close to that end of the barn, or if there's nothing in the house being used, like the television, we can faintly hear it sometimes, even though there's about 20 feet between the house and the store. So it's almost impossible for us to catch it unless everything is quiet. And my hearing's not that great anyway. So basically, that's what happened.
Thank you.
Further from the board? A couple of fundamental questions, Mr. Pearson.
Yeah.
Who ordered the alarm system to be installed?
I didn't catch that.
Who ordered the alarm system to be installed?
When?
Who ordered the alarm?
Oh, no, the MPs, the people that owned the store. See, the store was only open 2 weeks before it got shut down because of the pandemic. And then they left a few months later.
But they ordered it.
But they ordered the system. They're on the paperwork, and they put me down as a person to call if the alarm went off, and they gave me the passcode to put into the alarm if I was manually able to do it. Of course, I would have to hear it to be able to do that.
Okay, so the people that were owning or renting the store had the alarm system installed, and they put you down as a person to contact. Is that correct?
Yeah.
I'm the second person to contact after they try, of course, the owners of the system, the MPs. I don't think they called them first because they would have been home at 11 o'clock at night. I think what happened is the police called me when they got here, or they tried to call the MPs and they didn't answer or something like that because they were shining their flashlights in our house when we just got the phone call like 2 minutes before. And so the police were in the parking lot, so I didn't have time to do anything.
Okay, and just to be clear, because you are, as you say, listed as a contact, the alarm company did not call you?
Oh, no, they didn't call me. The only time they called me was a day or two later and to tell me that the battery was discharged and they couldn't monitor the system. And I told them, well, that's because it's unplugged. I said, I don't trust it.
Okay, thank you. And again, if I go back to the summary that I read, it indicated that the alarm was activated by a key fob, something like you use with your vehicle. Do you have a key fob, or does somebody else have that key fob?
We have one.
Yeah, we have one. If we hear it, we can manually use it to discharge, to disarm the alarm if we manually hear it. And we did hear it that one time earlier in the evening because the television was off and everything, and it was quiet. And when it went off, we heard this noise, faint noise. So my wife disarmed it. But then, of course, the second time at 11 o'clock that it went off, we weren't able to disarm it because we were in bed, and our bedroom is way at the other end of the house. So there's no way we could hear it unless we were at least in the living room and things were quiet, because if we're in the living room, the store is close enough that we can hear it if it goes off. It's fairly loud, but, you have to be pretty close.
Okay, thank you. And just bear with me, please, another question.
Okay.
You are the owners of the property, and you rented it out to someone?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. That sort of explains why you got the fee sent to you on that issue. Member Van Houten.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Pearson, if I could just ask, have you ever been in contact with the tenant then after this had happened?
Yes.
And no cooperation there? Or?
No, none whatsoever.
Oh, yeah.
They sort of just walked away from the business.
They left me with a $16,000 debt, and I wasn't charging them any rent. I was trying to help them. They had problems. They're on disability on that, and they have problems, so they couldn't hang in there when the store got closed. Their little bit of income that dried up, and they just got their website up and going, and it wasn't doing anything, so everything just fell apart on them, and they left.
So just so I'm clear, so the tenant had purchased the security system and had it installed, correct, before it started? Before they came to your property?
Did they order the system, or did you?
No. They called and made an appointment with Fluent, and I was here when they came, so I did meet the salespeople because they had to have my approval to install it since it was my building.
Okay.
So I was here when they came and made the appointment and signed the paperwork and that. And they put my name down as a contact to be called if they couldn't be reached.
Okay. Thank you so much, Mr. Pearson.
Okay, I have one last question. It's the chair speaking again. From the time that the tenants left the property to when the alarm came in, is that like a few days, a few weeks? What's the time factor there?
I'm sorry, I didn't get that.
Yeah, from the time the tenants left and locked up the store and walked away to the time this alarm came in, how much time was that in terms of days or weeks or what?
Oh, no, the alarm was on after they kind of left. They were coming back and forth for a couple of weeks trying to negotiate. They wanted to take all their inventory out of the store, so and the investor and myself wouldn't let them do that because we knew we'd never see it again. So we just basically tried to negotiate something out for that couple of weeks, and the alarm was still running. When the alarm company had called me and told me that it was not being monitored because the battery was dead, and I told her it was unplugged, she said, well, plug it back in again and let us know, how it goes, and we'll send somebody out. Well, they never sent anybody out. They never contacted me, and I only had it plugged in for maybe a week, and I went out into the store to vacuum up flies, and as soon as I turned the vacuum on, the alarm went off. So I shut it off again and unplugged it. So it was basically unplugged for the rest of that time.
Okay, and bear with me, please. You have indicated that you and another party would not let them take their inventory out because you were, looking to seize that inventory to help pay off the debt, or what were you going to do with that inventory?
Yes, we'd sell it off, and anything that was left over, we would give them their money.
Yeah, see, the inventory, I paid for all the inventory. They signed a promissory note. Of course, when they wanted to take all the inventory, there was two other investors involved, and they said, no, you don't let them have the inventory, we'll never see our money. And then we had another meeting with them and told them that we were keeping the inventory and we were going to sell it off and take whatever we get off the promissory note. Well, we also knew that it wouldn't make any difference. If we didn't get all our money back, we weren't going to go after them because there was nothing to go after. We knew we would never get anything, so we don't plan on going after them if we don't get our money back.
Okay, and so while that inventory was in the premises, on the property, you had a certain level of comfort that the alarm system was there protecting it?
No, the alarm system is off. I'm not going to be turning it back on, and the alarm company hasn't contacted me. I did talk to them again, and they said they would get back to me, and somebody would come out and see if they could figure out a way to add a system to the house so that I could hear it. And they've never come back. So there's no use us turning it on because we'd only have the same problem over again. We can't hear it when we're in the house.
Thank you very much for that. To the members of the board, any discussion, comment, resolution, please? Member Van Houten?
I'm just thinking out loud here. It's an anomaly that the person who the property owner is not the owner actually of the system. So in that regard, my thoughts are that this would be excluded from this. Just brainstorming.
Mr. Santos?
Mr. Chair, DeWilly, my understanding is the owner, who I believe is Mr. Pearson, owns the property. So he is liable for the alarm. That's my reading of the act.
Further?
Mike, sorry, Mr. Chairman, I just jumped in. So, but I'm just brainstorming, George, in this regard, that the responsibility for it is actually the tenant, because they actually had it put in. I'm just thinking this through. It seems different than anything else. I don't want to set a precedent and all that type of thing, but that's what I'm brainstorming at the moment here.
Go ahead.
Mr. Chair, to Willie, my understanding is the property owner is basically the individual that has to do their due diligence when it comes to either if it's a tenant or non-tenant, the owner. And when I look at the policy, so it's pretty straightforward. It says, you know, was there an alarm on April the 24th of 2020? I would say yes. Was it false alarm? Yes, because it's defined as a false alarm. So the question is, who's at fault? It's the property owner. And I, too, am a landlord and a property owner on a number of properties, and I've had this come up prior to this alarm, or let's put it this way, this bylaw alarm. I guess I would vote in favor that, yes, it is a false alarm on the basis of the property owner owning the property. And I mean, that's my take.
Go ahead, Willie.
Okay, I'll just give you an example. I rent a property for farming. So the owner owns the security system, but when I fell the kills, they switch it to my wife and my own phone. So I actually take full responsibility. I would hope I would take full responsibility, and that's where I'm thinking that this is an anomaly. This is a different scenario, because maybe I've got that wrong. So I'm just brainstorming it that way.
Go ahead, George.
If I may, Mr. Chair, again, from what I understand, the whole issue here is, and it's the fact, is it a false alarm? At the end of the day, who's at fault? It's the property owner. So if it's a tenant or a property owner, ultimately it's the property owner. It's up to the property owner to speak to the tenant. Now, if the tenant unfortunately has walked away, then it's the nature of the beast. You have to swallow it and move on. That's my understanding, and this is how I look at it. If we're opening this Pandora box with regards to who's going to pay the bill, the landlord or the tenant, then we have to revisit the bylaw. But I think it's fairly clear. And I think when I look at this whole issue, I mean, we've been and when I say we've been, I have to say Norfolk County has been more than open, and no disrespect to the Pearsons. I mean, Section 4 specifically says that 30 days from the date of the invoice, and they surpassed the 30 days. And so that to me right away, just, it's a yellow flag. And I do understand because it says in the notice of appeal, the reasoning. So that's number one. It's up to the board, so that's my stand, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Mr.
Can I
Columbus.
say something?
Hang on, Mr. Pearson, we'll give you a chance. Go ahead, Mr. Columbus.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And yes, it's unfortunate for the Pearsons to be in this situation. I agree with Member Santos on this. And hopefully, I would think that with what was left behind as goods and inventory, that they can recoup some of their cost.
Go ahead, Mr. Pearson, you want to say something?
It's just that when that gentleman said the 30 days was passed, I never got the notice of appeal in the original invoice, and I did finally get it after I asked for it again, because the lady told me I needed that form. I finally got that form, and I did fill it out and send it back in as soon as I got it. But that wasn't my fault that I didn't get it. Somebody just forgot to put it in, I guess, with the invoice.
Yes, in fact, we have that from staff, and I will read it for the benefit of everyone. It says, initially, it was understood that the appeal was outside the acceptable time frame. However, after further investigation and discussions with Mr. Pearson, as well as with staff, it was determined that Mr. Pearson did try to question the invoice that he received, and that as such, the appeal should be moved forward. So there was an attempt by yourself to question this when you did get it, and something went amiss. It was confirmed that Mr. Pearson called in early June, so April, May, June. So 24th of April, 24th of May, early June, let's be a bit reasonable, to contest the invoice. And the phone call was received by a staff member in a different Norfolk County department who was unsure as what to do with the information. So that explains the delay in time. However, if I might try to clarify the issue vis-a-vis the owner of the property and the owner of the system. What Mr. Pearson has told us is that the owners of the system left the premises, walked away. Perhaps on reason, at that point, the alarm system should have been shut off by either the property owner or by the departing renter. It wasn't. I won't conject as to why it was left on, but it was left on until such time as a couple of alarms went off, and then Mr. Pearson unplugged it. So I leave that with you to contemplate for a second, but I'm looking for a motion to either declare this as a false alarm and the invoice stands, or that we accept the appeal from Mr. Pearson. I'll leave it to you, gentlemen. Santos?
Well,
So, Mr. Chair, to our board, the question that is posed to us is straightforward. Is or was there a false alarm? We have information that it was, as defined with the bylaw 2021. So I put forth a motion that, taking into account that it is an alarm, that the property owner is responsible for payment of this alarm.
Thank you. A seconder for that motion? Sir Columbus seconds that motion. Debate. Willie?
Just my dilemma with the motion a little bit. It just kind of relates to the responsibility of the payment. I totally agree with what you're saying. So I would have thought the tenant should have been responsible for the payment. That's the only reason why I would vote against the motion. So respectfully, though, I understand the integrity of this policy, the benefits of it, and I don't want to do anything that would upset it, but for the long term, and it's dangerous setting precedents, and so I thank you for your back and forth on this, because, but I still would have to vote against it just on that. In my own mind, the payment for it should have been the tenant.
Go ahead, George.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think a lot of this has to go down to the question of, it's the facts. Now, the responsibility of the payment ultimately will come to the landlord, and it would be much easier for the county to put it forth or put it towards the property owner because of the taxes. Other than that, good luck getting any money from a tenant.
Let me see if I can give you a bit of context as well. That might help you in your discussion. Mr. Santos, you've declared to be a landlord. One of your tenants walks away and doesn't pay the water bill. Do you pay the water bill, sir?
Mr. Chair, I'll refrain from answering that question because the issue here that we have in front of us is basically the issue of a false alarm. And I'm going to just answer the question with reference to the false alarm. And again, yes, it is a false alarm. But with regards to the issue of water or sewer, that's for another day. Thank you.
Anything further? Okay, the mayor is not here. She had to leave to do some other business, so there are 4 of us. And I do say to you that a tie vote is a lost vote, so it will depend on how this splits. If it's a 3-1, then Mr. Pearson will unfortunately have to pay. If it's a 2-2, then Mr. Pearson will be happy with the result. So I call the vote. Moved by Mr. Santos, seconded by Mr. Columbus, that the false alarm appeal submitted by Ron Pearson be denied. And that's the motion, correct? I'll call the vote. All in favor of denial? I see 2. Not in favor? I see 2. So the motion fails. Mr. Pearson, we will make staff aware of that, and you will not have to pay the $200.
Well, thank you for your time.
Yeah, I really appreciate you helping.
Get rid of that alarm system, sir.
We will. Thank you so much.
And we're going to leave it unplugged.
Yeah. So then we move ahead, members of the PSB, and takes us to item number 6, any business arising from the minutes of the September 23rd or October the 7th meetings. We've already accepted those minutes as printed. Seeing none, the correspondence, we did accept the communication on the Community Safety and Wellness Plan. And did we have that here? That communication? We have the one on the speed signs. No, probably it's here. There's one on the speed signs. So we'll go to the one on the electronic speed signs, and that's certainly, council did receive that during budget discussions, and the motion from the PSB was to increase the number to 10 and use some of the monies from the, I won't call them revenues, but the costs incurred of false alarms, which is held by the Community Services Division. And Mr. Columbus, can you update us?
Yes, about this time yesterday, we did discuss this at full council. It was the capital budget session, and in the capital budget, rather than full 10 signs, 6 signs were approved for going forward, which is a step in the right direction. And the signs actually in total cost more than the 60-some $100. I think it's closer to $8,000 a sign. So we are getting 6 more proposed for the year 2021.
Thank you, and the monies from the false alarms stays where it is?
Well, my understanding, I didn't get to talk to staff after that, but it was not utilized for the purpose of these signs. Where it actually is, I don't know, but it wasn't utilized to put towards the signs. I believe there was $40-some thousand put into the budget line for it, and that will cover the 6 signs.
Well, thank you very much. I'll continue the dialogue with staff. I think that if that were the case and the money's there, perhaps 1 or 2 more LiDAR units might just be something we could use, or the disposal of any kind of seized marijuana crop in terms of the county's costs related to disposal. That might be something as well. So I'll throw those things out there for discussion with staff. Go ahead, Councillor.
Could I ask the Staff Sergeant Fashing, is there a possibility that, like, the sign going into Port Dover and out of Port Dover on the blue line west of the town of Port Dover, there's a sign, one of these signs going in and one going out. Is there a possibility that we could only post the signage going east into town, or do you have to do both east and west?
You know, Mr. Chair, we have the option to post the signs either direction. We don't necessarily have to pair the signs up in locations either. One sign can be posted, for example, I'll use the example of Norfolk Street north of town. I think a sign would be highly appropriate as traffic comes southbound down 24 onto Norfolk Street. I think a sign would be highly appropriate there, and that would be the only sign we need in that area. So we have the option to post two bi-directional or one sign to monitor one direction.
Thank you for that. And secondly,
Just a moment, when you say we, the determination is made by who?
Well, through, Mr. Chair, in consultation with Police Services Board and the Traffic Safety Committee, the recommendations as to where these signs are posted. So when I use the term we, I speak in that broad base.
Thank you very much. Go ahead, Councillor.
these signs are, do we have all the signs out that we currently have now, and they are mounted on wooden posts? Can they be moved to different places after 2 or 3 months?
Mr. Chair, yes, all the signs are currently posted and functional. They are on wooden posts. They can be moved.
Okay. And what about the portable sign that we have? Is it used on a daily basis?
The portable sign is used on a daily basis, is in current rotation, and I believe is set up right now on Cockshot Road south of St. John's.
Thank you for my questions.
Thank you. And just to keep PSB in the loop, I did receive an email relative to Highway Traffic Act concerns, speeding and others, passing on the right, that type of stuff, on Norfolk Street North. That have to clarify in our own minds, is that provincial highway or is it our highway? By I mean Norfolk County's. Not that it makes a big difference, but in terms of billing, it does make a big difference. But I corresponded with this individual and passed the email along to both staff sergeants for their attention, simply because Inspector Varga is away for the next week. And but it does fall to, again, and this is repetitive, Mike, repetitive, that it falls to the county to deal with traffic calming measures, which is why the Highway Traffic Safety Committee exists, to discuss these issues and find out what can happen, whether it's additional speed signs, lowering of the speed limit, road reconstruction of some sort, all of those things, including the speed watch signs that are pole mounted. They all fall under the county's jurisdiction. Okay? So with that, we accept the correspondence on speed signs mover. Seconder. All in favor? Thank you. The minutes from the Norfolk County Community Policing Committee, September 24th. Everyone's had a chance to read those. They're for information. Mover and seconder to accept those. Councilor Columbus, Mr. Santos. Any comments on those? I know they've gone through the process of chair, vice chair once again, and they're sorting themselves out. I don't see anything that's at this point earth-moving or shocking that we should be concerned about. They're still getting their feet wet, as it were. Thank you very much. The OPP monthly report. Sir, thank you very much for picking up the error. I certainly looked at it and said, well, where are the September stats? So you did send out the amended version, and I thank you very much through Owen. Go ahead, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This report is for the month of September. And just to begin, overtime allotment year-to-date till September, total dollars spent to date are $216,944.61 of a total of $423,114,000. So our percentage spent year-to-date is 51.27%.
Is there anything, sorry, staff, is there anything on the horizon, normal things or ill normal, or not normal, that we can project that will increase that amount through to the end of the year? Like ride programs?
Mr. Chair, nothing that I can predict through the end of the year. There's always the potential for serious crime, but in terms of other operations we have going on, I would say nothing significant at this point.
Nothing on Friday 13th?
Friday the 13th, there will be some overtime incurred. However, a significant amount of that will be provincial as well.
Okay, thank you very much. And I think it's generally the flavor around the table that if you would look at the big four with more intensity, we would greatly appreciate that.
We'll have our, I believe our ride, our annual ride campaign begins November 14th. So our focus for the festive ride season begins then, and that runs until January the 1st or 4th, I believe. Auxiliary policing hours, primarily again, I have August numbers here, which was 70 for administration. Just a quick note on that. We've had some positive news in that we are now reintegrating our auxiliary back into operations as they had previous to COVID-19. So we're very pleased about that and pleased to have them back. Crime Stoppers, year to date, we've had 426 anonymous tips that are at various stages of investigation. Not a lot of news or action due to COVID-19, particularly as it pertains to fundraising, but we did have 2 shredding events in Dunnville and in Hagersville, so that were relatively successful. And again, just a note, they're still actively seeking new board members for the Crime Stoppers Committee. Locally dedicated overtime hours for the month of September. Municipal hours, we had 908.25 hours. Provincially, we had 225.86 hours. So just for comparison, we're down a bit from last year where we had 1,196 municipal hours. Then we have the statistics portion. In terms of what we have going on, focused patrols, we have an ongoing focused foot patrol throughout the county, and particularly the town of Simcoe right now. We completed a focused patrol for speeding on Thompson Road, Waterford. We dedicated 7 hours and had 2 charges. We did do a stunt driving focused patrol. This was in the village of Fairground out in the West End where we've had some issues. We did end up laying 4 charges in that. And Mr. Chair, just regarding correspondence from you, I believe that's where the mix-up came. We labeled the Focus Patrol stunt driving, but they weren't necessarily stunt driving charges. So hopefully that clears it up. We also currently have a Focus Patrol on Cockshot Road, south of St. John's, in and near Port Dover. Speed spy studies, we've completed one on Terrell Street in Simcoe on the 28th of September. We didn't find an issue. We did one on James Street in Waterford, 28th of September as well, no issue. We have one results pending for one from October on Oak Street in Simcoe and on Byerly Side Road in Cortland. We're waiting for the technical analysis from that. Mentioned earlier, speed watch sign. We were on Norfolk Street north. We found it to be highly effective in that area, measuring speeds before and after. We were also on Cedar Street in Norfolk, and again on Norfolk Street between 13th and Culver. And again, very effective in those areas. And as I mentioned now, we currently have it on the Cockshot Road south of St. John's. PD activity, as you all aware, we do have a Friday the 13th coming up, November the 13th. We've upstaffed somewhat for the event. We're hoping that it's rather subdued given the messaging from the county and the time of year that it's occurring, but we are prepared to respond as needed.
Thank you. Questions from the board? Columbus.
Yes, related question. It's with respect to enforcement of speeding and that. I had the question, I believe we're getting some more, increasing our staff complement on the front lines. Is that right? How many new officers have we got coming on stream to meet our cap?
We have one recruit who actually started last Friday, and then we have two more recruits that will be starting with us in January.
2 more in January?
Yes.
And will there be more coming over and above that?
At this point, I not that I am aware of. However, that's certainly a fluid situation that can change based on transfers and other pressures.
Not to dispute anything that the staff has said. Certainly my conversations with the inspector around the 9 vacancies that we have had, he indicated the 1 transfer in for sure, that'll take us to 8. And as a result of the announcement from the provincial government that they were going to staff up another 200, yes. I think it was, that we were promised 8 of those. I'm not sure the timeline for them to come in or anything else, but that was the promise made. I don't want to draw the connection with all the questions we asked about where the situation was across Ontario or anything else, but it seemed coincidental that after the OAPSB raised that question, all of a sudden the announcement was made.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Mr. Santos?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. To the Staff Sergeant, on page, I'm just looking here, actually, looking at the last draft that was put together. It's not referred to pages, so I'm going to go to stats. We're looking at September of 2020 trafficking. So we're looking at the actual. So for the month of September, but in total for the year, I understand we have 24 charges of trafficking. Staff Sergeant. So I'm just looking at this. There's an increase of 20%. What type of drugs are we talking about when we're looking at trafficking? And sorry.
What types?
Yeah, what types of trafficking are we talking about?
Well, I think we're dealing primarily with fentanyl and fentanyl related drugs, which often include cocaine. And we'll also want to include in this marijuana and cannabis seized from illegal grow operations.
Okay. So those are the two primary ones when it comes
Yes.
to trafficking downtown Simcoe or
Yeah.
trafficking in general in Norfolk,
Correct.
correct? Okay.
Further-
Now, sorry. Also, in reference to speeding, if I could just add, so our last meeting, I asked the question if there's a special enforcement team with speeding, and I understood from our chief of police, Varga, that each officer basically is trained in speeding, so it's up to each officer to do that specific issue of speeding. So if we have a complaint, because there's been several complaints over the last month or so, and Mr. Chair, you've alluded to a number of emails. So the question basically is this, Staff Sergeant, do we leave it then up to each officer? And then by looking at the focus patrols, is it based on the complaint or complaint system? Or is there continuous speed enforcement?
Yep, a couple points there to address. Yes, all of our officers are responsible for traffic enforcement.
Okay.
And traffic enforcement is part of our daily operations, irregardless of the existence of a focus patrol or not. Our members are always out doing traffic enforcement. And I just want to reiterate a point about speeding complaints. We get them. We utilize the technology we have with Speed Spies to determine if there is actually a speeding issue, to separate the reality from the perception. And then once we determine that, that's when we establish focus patrols based on factual information that there is in fact speeding taking place.
Thank you.
Further? I need a mover and a seconder to accept the report from the OPP on the monthly statistics. All in favor of receiving? Thank you very much. Carried. To the agenda, then that takes us to other business, and Mr. Santos, you wanted to raise a point about attendance at a seminar?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, I sent an email to our secretary, Mr. Jaggert, basically requesting the attendance. It's my understanding that the cost is $400 for attendance for the 2 days, and the two half-a-days, I believe, so it's $200 per half a day, and I believe it's through Zoom. So I'm just wondering, Mr. Chair, if any other member or members are planning to attend this Zoom. I think it's important because we're talking the Ontario Association of Police Services Board, and that was mentioned previously with respect to the issue of our loopholes.
Anyone else want to speak to that issue in the labor seminar that PSB is hosting? This would be, I guess to you, Owen, the fee, is that for the whole board or just individuals?
I believe it's $400 per individual, which we do have a budget for that because we didn't attend the conference this year.
Yeah, so strategically speaking, in terms of the bank account, the luxury model of the LiDAR was not available, so we went with the lesser model, 3,000 versus 4,000. As Owen has said, there was no conference this year, or zone meeting. It was so far, so those monies were not expended, so we still have money in the bank. It's just a matter of the board's approval and having Mr. Santos attend and then give us a report thereafter.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I certainly commend Mr. Santos for wanting to do this, and I totally support it. I think it's important for member training and to keep up, and it would certainly be beneficial to get the report back. So thank you so much.
You want to make a motion to allow that expenditure to occur?
Yes, be happy to.
Seconder, Mr. Columbus, all in favor? So passed. Make a note of that, please, Owen. Another piece of other business I will raise with you, unless there's anything else from the floor. So, okay, on November the 9th, we have scheduled, at this point, a meeting with Norfolk County bylaw. I'm not clear in my mind at this point whether that transfer has occurred from the legal department to the clerk's department. Just a point of clarification, I don't know if that's approved yet or not, Mike, but if it's the clerk's department or if it's the council, legal, not council, but council, the legal office, either way, November the 9th, we'll have a meeting. What I have indicated to them is, Mr. Milson particularly, send the bylaw references to Owen. Owen will then send us individually and prepare a package for us of those bylaws. And then we will have an administrative meeting of the board with our partners, and we will sit down, and hopefully at that meeting you will have gone through the bylaws and highlighted your concerns or observations or comments, and we'll have a discussion about those things. If it's noise, say the noise bylaw, is the county going to provide the tools necessary at the front line to deal with noise? What is it they want to have happen? What is the enforcement action? And then not just walk in and say, okay, quiet it down once or twice or whatever, but if there is in fact enforcement action taken, we have to consider then the officer's time going to court and all the other things. And is that any less or more expensive or time consuming than having bylaw do the thing? So just that kind of a discussion. Are the tools going to be made available? Whether it's simple ticket books or whether it's a sound meter or anything else. If it's some sort of animal concern, which animals, under what circumstances, and what do they want to have us do with them, type of thing. So I just get you thinking in that process. So Owen's going to receive those, or going to prompt them to get those, because we're running short of time. This week is the last week of October. So he'll get those references. He'll send those bylaws to us as a board and to our partners, the OPP. And then we'll do our own homework on them. And then I'll sit down. Owen will send out a notice to all of you and say, what's your, excuse me, what's your time schedule look like? And we'll have an administrative meeting in the back room and go through these things. And so then we can, when we meet with bylaw, provide this feedback and say, okay, here are the things. I don't want to make it overly cumbersome in terms of administration or anything else, but I want to dot the I's and cross the T's. Okay? And I'm sure you do as well. Anything else under other business from the board members? Yes, Mr. Santos.
Mr. Chair, I just want to, if I can, to our two staff sergeants. It was my understanding that last month, Mr. Carter, Cam Carter from the BIA, sent some positive news, and I believe, if I remember correctly, it was forwarded to the staff sergeants and also to our chief of police with regards to the positivity downtown and the local businesses. It's not every day that we hear something positive, but it was reassuring to know that people have taken note, that there are more foot patrols, and again, something positive. Lately, all we've been hearing is negative, 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 and where are the police and so on and so forth. So it's nice to actually hear some positive coming from the roots or the ground roots in the downtown core. Thank you, Mr. Chair. So thank you.
Thank you very much. And if there are no other issues, I did receive a check here, and it is for the auctions, Police Auctions Canada, so we have a bit more money to put in the bank, and it's for $145.75, so that'll be deposited by Owen into our bank account, and as normal, a lot of that stuff is bicycles and old bicycles and bicycle parts, and so if you're wondering why the amount isn't a tremendous number, I made an error and I signed that silly check. I thought it was the other check. So anyway, it'll go through. We do have to sign that other check, George, okay? Question period from the media. Yes, ma'am.
Thank you, Chair. So just acknowledging that York and Norfolk are quite different landscapes here, I'm just wondering what will be taken away from the earlier presentation and sort of translated to Norfolk County to deal with our local cannabis enforcement.
Thank you for that question, and I'll attempt to answer some part of it, and I'm sure Councillor Columbus will dive in at some point. Unfortunately, the mayor isn't here to respond as well. But I guess the takeaway is that York Region and its partners have taken this issue very seriously and have given us a roadmap, if you wish, as to how things could unfold. I don't want to denigrate in any way, shape, or form the current activity between our own bylaw and our police force, because that's a healthy working relationship. There may be in that roadmap some very positive and informative issues that we should pick up on. And I'll mention a couple, and it's really about the toolbox. You know, it's just not the one enforcement officer for marijuana in Norfolk County that plays a role here. It's the fire inspector, it's the building inspector, it's the other bylaw officers that go out and do clean yard bylaw complaints, that kind of stuff. So there's a broader context to the overall bubbling up of the issues from bylaw to police and then through to an enforcement and working with Health Canada. Also, a takeaway is a clarification on the presentation from Health Canada back on the 7th of October and how the police are working with them and getting information from them through and under the umbrella of an active criminal investigation. We will be providing the handshake with York Region and the Ontario Association of Police Services Boards, the OAPSB, because there are 444 municipalities in Ontario, and I think we all have to be on the same page, on the same song sheet, and speaking with some consistency. I like the idea of a draft example bylaw that may exist. My takeaway from that is that's good, but there are many other bylaws that currently exist that can be used as tools in the box to prompt a concern and an investigation to take place. Mr. Columbus, you want to add anything to that?
Well, I found that presentation very interesting, and we found out that York is actually working very closely with their bylaw department, and I believe that if it's not taking place, it certainly should be taking place within Norfolk County here. And also, I found it interesting that they had a designated officer to investigate the cannabis issue. I don't think we have that at all. Do we, Staff Sergeant Fasci?
Mr. Chair, that would exist in the form of our provincial cannabis enforcement team.
Yeah, that'd be provincial. Okay, and then the fact that they have a number to call Health Canada, that 1-800 number that's kind of private, I think that would really help us. Whether someone in fact has a license or not a license, whether it's indoor or outdoor, how many plants they have, that would be really, really wonderful to have. And their information on how they destroy the product. We just passed a motion the other day to a county council to pay for destroying these plants. And it was actually mentioned that they have a wood chipper come in to do that job, and it seems to be working very well. So perhaps we can utilize something very similar here. And what else was it? Also, they are encouraging Health Canada to look at the process of the prescribing process, which I think is very, very important to have Health Canada get involved and look at that same situation with respect to Norfolk County.
Further from the board? Mr. Santos.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. To the media, Mrs. Taylor, or Miss Taylor, sorry. What I have found as a provincial appointee is basically this. What happens in North York also happens in Norfolk County. And the communication lines are open, but, and they're very action-oriented, such as Norfolk County. But what I've noticed here is the inaction of our federal government. I mean, York Regional Police are having the same difficulty that the OPP are having. So municipally, provincially, everything seems to be fine. It's the inaction of the federal government. And I point the fingers to them because this all comes down to policy. It's the loopholes. So that's basically all I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And if I could just add one more thing before we go to our very short closed session, ladies and gentlemen. I see, at least my perception is, I see a disconnect. On October the 7th, we had a presentation from Health Canada, and what came out of that was a recognition that we should all be spreading more broadly about the Health Canada complaint form under the cannabis policy. The disconnect I think I see is they'll complain to Health Canada, but does Health Canada share those complaints with the local municipality? And I doubt it seriously. So if Mrs. Smith or Mr. Jones out on the concession road has a big problem with odor because of what's happening next door to them, and they fill out that complaint form and send it in to Health Canada, you know, unless Mrs. Smith and Mr. Jones also tell our bylaw officers about it, I don't think there's going to be a connection made, really. So certainly, I think it's up to ourselves, up to the OPP, up to council, to get that message out there that, you know, if you have a problem, let us know about it. Otherwise, you know, we'll just have to stumble on it or something like that. Go ahead, Mr. Santos.
Just to add to that, I'm going to use the word crisis. We're in crisis. I mean, if we look at Norfolk County in the last month, with those dates that I mentioned before, I mean, my math comes out to 5 million of illegal cannabis. That's a lot of money. Illegal. And we're not getting any leadership from the federal government. It's just I'm flabbergasted.
Well, I won't defend the federal government, but having said that, we heard that the legislation will be under review. Federal government works in a framework what's called process, and the bureaucrats have to design it and then present it to Parliament for approval. If it's a legislation, if it's a piece of legislation or regulation attached thereto. So, yeah, I think they're beginning to realize there's a big problem. That their intent was to provide marijuana to the masses, and they've done that. That was a plank in their platform, and they won. Now they have to correct some of those things. So, and I do appreciate the fact that Ms. Finley has a petition out there, and people should go to her website or wherever and find that petition and sign it. Thank you very much. Anything further? Okay. No other questions, Ms. Ashley? Good to see you this morning. You know, a different face from the bearded white-haired guy we used to have. I need a move and a second to go in closed session to discuss things that we would not discuss in open session. Mr. Santos, Mr. Van Houten, thank you very much. All in favor? Okay, we'll go in closed session, Owen.